Yes, first and foremost, thank you for the kind introduction. My name is Riccardo Grosselle, and today I will present ongoing work on the topic of multiscale modeling of fiber bridging in a mixed mode delamination of unidirectional composites. And of course, I have to acknowledge the fact that the work has been performed in collaboration with my supervisors and co-workers, Esben Lindgaard and Laura. So the challenge we want to solve is we would like to improve the damage tolerance and reliability of future composite structures, such as, for instance, wind turbine blades or aircraft, by being able to tailor the complex mechanical interactions across length scales. And this is during delamination. Now, an example can be seen in the illustration below, where we can see that there are hundreds, if not thousands of fibers that are crossing over from one crack face to the other. Now, currently, there exist several homogenized models using, for instance, cohesive zone modeling or the virtual crack technique approach, which can be fitted to replicate the arc behavior of an interface. However, the Achilles heel of these models is that they do not provide us with any information with respect to the underlying mechanisms that are responsible for such a toughened response, because basically the fibers are not included into the model. Now, in this work, we present a discrete multi-scale mechanical model of the bridging zone, which actually allows us to replicate the arc behavior of the interface. However, the novelty lies in the fact that we can identify which properties of the ligaments, substrates, and the interface are responsible for the different arc responses, basically creating an understanding of these micro mechanisms. So the presentation is divided into three parts. Firstly, I will talk about the finite element multiscale model. I will then present the validation study, and lastly, I will conclude. So let's start with the finite element multiscale framework. So the framework that we have developed is inspired from the work of Canal and co-workers in 2016, in which they simplified or they modeled the bridging ligaments as bundles, and basically they've used the model to simulate mode 1 delamination. Now, this claim is actually supported by experimental evidence, which can be seen, for instance, over here. Now, this is a picture, a micrograph, which can be found in the literature at the environmental scanning electron microscope of a bridging bundle. And what we can notice is the fact that the ligament is composed by a mixture of fibers, in this case, at some point, 4 fibers, and matrix material. Now, this is further supported by some observations performed by Papas and Botsis in 2016, where they basically sectioned a specimen in the middle of the bridging zone, and they also observed the presence of bundles. So our finite element framework is composed of 3 main ingredients. We have a substrate, the fiber bundles, and the connector elements. So let's start with the substrate. Now, the substrate is modeled with 3D reduced integration linear brick elements, and the microstructure is not modeled, but it is simply homogenized by using an orthotropic material model. The bundles are discretized or are modeled with linear Timoshenko beam elements, and the diameter of the bundles is actually sampled from a Gaussian distribution, which of course depends on only 2 parameters, namely the mean diameter of the bundles and the standard deviation. Lastly, it's also important to underline that the beam model also includes a linear stress-strain degradation law, which actually allows us to simulate bundle breakage, essentially. And this is dependent on only 2 parameters, namely the maximum stress and the strain at failure. And essentially what happens is that when the strain at failure is reached, the element is deleted from the simulation. So now we move to the part which I think is the most interesting, because these connector elements, which essentially they model the interaction between the substrate or each substrate and the fiber bundles. So they're responsible for modeling both macroscopic crack probe as well as the bridging of the fibers. And in many ways, these connector elements are similar to cohesive elements in that they're also equipped with a traction separation law, which in this case we've decided to be a bilinear law. However, the main difference is the fact that cohesive elements, they usually employ or use a stress-based traction separation law, whereas our own or the connector elements use a force-based law. However, whichever or any cohesive law can be interpreted as a connector traction separation law by using the physics or by looking at the physics. Because basically what happens is that if a connector element breaks, then the crack will grow by an area which is given by the diameter of the fiber bundle multiplied by the length of the element. And if we divide the force required to break the connector element by this area, we return to the stress. However, in order to trigger fiber bridging, we have two different cohesive laws, or sorry, traction separation law, a weak and a strong one. And the main difference is related to the, or actually the only difference is related to the onset stress, which in turn also changes the energy dissipated when the connector element breaks. And one thing that's important to underline is the fact that the distribution of these strong and weak connector element cohesive laws, or sorry, traction separation laws, it's stochastic, as we can see over here. The only constraint is that if one side is strong, the opposite side must be weak. And this is done basically with the idea of the fact that the weak connector element should break off first, and the fiber will be anchored to the strong one, essentially. And lastly, I would like to note that mixed mode behavior is implemented via a quadratic power law, both in terms of damage initiation and damage evolution. So over here, we have a list over all of the parameters that we can change within our model to fit different arc of responses. And what I would like to underline is the fact that, of course, there are 10 parameters in total, and these parameters are related to the fiber bundles, the bundle substrate interface, and the stochasticity which we built into the model. So now we present the validation study. And to reiterate, the target is that we would like to characterize the micromechanical toughening mechanisms affecting the arc of response and fiber bridging of an interface. So in order to do so, we have compared the numerical arc curves with the experimental values from the literature. In this case, we have taken the data from Erives and co-workers from 2023, in which they've analyzed a glass fiber epoxy DCB UBM specimen, whose dimensions can be seen over here. And DCB UBM stands for double cantilever beam with uneven bending moments. And we've tested 4 different mode mixities. And one thing that I would like to underline is the fact that actually we were able to halve the size of the model by simply considering symmetric boundary conditions along the XY planes. So basically, instead of 30 millimeters, we only model 15. And lastly, I would like to underline that the arc curve or the arc curve are plotted against the magnitude of the end opening displacements. So before seeing some results, I would like to show the values that we use to fit the arc curves. And essentially what I wanted to kind of highlight is the fact that only 2 of these values came from the experiments, from the experimental work. Whereas all of the other values, they were actually, calibrated. 10 seconds. Yes. Yes, well, what I was saying is the fact that all of the other 8 values, they're essentially calibrated to the model. Yes, no worries. My pointer doesn't work. Can you click on the presentation? Yes, whereas all of the other values were estimated. Be careful, they were not estimated because we cannot measure them. It's simply because they were not available in the data set that we used. And essentially, what we did was we found the parameters with which we were able, or one set of parameters that were able to replicate all of the arc curves at the 4 different Born mixities. So over here, we see some of the results in mode 1 and mode 1 dominated delamination. And over here, we see the arc curves. Whereas in this slide over here, we see mixed mode 1, 2, and the mode 2 dominated with the respective arc curves. And of course, it's important to underline that this is just a 2-dimensional picture, but the analysis or animation, but the analyses are 3-dimensional, fully 3-dimensional. Yes, the most interesting part is, of course, the comparison between experimental and numerical results. The experimental results are the dotted lines. And what we can see is actually that there is a very good correlation between numerical and experimental results, both in terms of onset of crack propagation, as well as steady state values of the arc curves. And the same applies also for the other two mode mixes. And what is also relatively interesting to underline is the fact that over here, we see that the curve that we have modeled, they contain quite a lot of scatter. And that's because of the stochasticity that we introduced into the model by the means of this randomly distributed, or according to a Gaussian distribution, diameter of the bundles, as well as the stochasticity of these connector elements. So to conclude the presentation, first and foremost, we have developed a multi-scale finite element framework that can model the micromechanical mechanisms responsible for the arc of response and fiber bridging of an interface. And the idea is that this tool will help us to create fundamental knowledge of such mechanisms, such that we will be able to design more damage-tolerant and reliable complex structures in the future. Now, lastly, currently, we are working with fiddling around tailoring basically the interface to improve the damage tolerance, and by identifying the parameters or key parameters affecting the fiber bridging and, of course, the arc of response. And thus far, we've tested only the bundle strength and the stiffness of the bundles. So if any one of you is working with maximizing the damage tolerance of the interface by promoting extrinsic buffering, I would really like to talk to you after this presentation. At last, I would like to acknowledge my colleagues at the cracks research group, and I would also like to acknowledge the authors of this presentation. Thank you very much.